Okay, it looks like I'm finally live somewhere. So, I'm sorry I'm late. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Digging In with Bonnie. This is Bonnie coming at you on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about double deception. It's written by Ann Rule. It's from the book Too Late to Say Goodbye. For those of you that are on the radio station listening and you have to keep hearing me repeat myself, I really do apologize. Hopefully, next week goes much smoother for me. This is my first round doing this alone. And thank God for technology because my tech man's on the other end of the computer here helping me out. And we just lost the radio station. Oh, what a morning this is. What a morning. Or afternoon, I should say. So, anyway, we're going to be Jennifer Corbin. She was one of those people that almost everybody liked, probably because she liked everybody. Tall, blonde, pretty. She was a 33-year-old mom, thought of others before herself. She did everything she could to keep her small sons happy. Married for nearly 9 years, Jen and Bart Corbin appeared to have everything: 2 healthy children, a lovely home in Beaufort, Georgia, a good marriage, admired professions. Bart was a dentist, while Jen taught preschool part-time at Methodist Church. But tiny thread-like fissures had been creeping through the foundation of their marriage. By the fall of 2004, a divorce was in the works. December 4th, 2004, Steve and Kelly Camus. I'm sorry, he's still working on the computer and it caught my attention. I apologize. Who lived across the street were startled to hear someone knocking at the front door. See Dalton Corbin, age 7. His face was red, his cheeks streaked with tears. My daddy shot my mommy. I need you to call 911. Skeptical, of course. Steve calmly, nevertheless, called 911, while Kelly followed Dalton to check on their friend and neighbor. She doubted that Dalton had actually seen what he described. The Corbins' overhead garage door was open. Door to the kitchen unlocked, and headed down to the hall toward the master bedroom with the 2 boys trailing her. In the bedroom, she could see Jen lying diagonally across the bed. It was an odd position. Feeling a shiver of alarm, Kelly reached out to touch Jen's right shoulder. She could be sleeping. Kelly pressed harder. There was no reassuring thrum of blood coursing there. The flesh was cold. Jen wasn't breathing. Kelly saw a trickle of blood coming from her nose. She glimpsed what looked like a pistol, but poking out from a coverlet, I guess? Okay. Feeling as if she were in the midst of a nightmare, Kelly backed away, careful not to touch anything. She was way gone. Kelly later recalled to an investigator, Jen had been healthy and vibrant. There was no reason at all for her to have a handgun in her bed. As shocked as Kelly was by what she saw, her thoughts turned quickly to the 2 little boys. They were Jen's biggest concerns always. Now Dalton and Dylan had no mother. Kelly's heart constricted. She ran back to her house, taking the 2 boys with her, and soon heard a shriek of sirens. Only then did Kelly realize that she might have been in danger herself when she entered the Corbin's house. She realized something else. There had been no sign of Bart. One day, well into their marriage, Jennifer Corbin had asked her sister and close confidant Heather, "Do you ever wonder what your husband did or who he knew before you met him?" Heather answered, "No. I know what Doug's life was like." Jen says, "I don't." She had met Bart in 1995 when she was 31. He was 24. But she knew virtually nothing about his personal or romantic life before then. Whenever she asked him about his past, he wouldn't meet her gaze. It didn't seem to matter at first. Handsome, dark-haired Bart was tall, 6'3" to her 6-foot frame, which he was a practicing dentist and seemed a most eligible bachelor. They met at a Barnacle Oyster Bar in where she was a waitress and bartender while figuring out what to do with her college degree. Like almost everyone else, Jen was drawn to Bart's wittiness. He could offer a quick and hilarious comment on almost anything. They began dating, and Jen was in high spirits. When she introduced to her parents, Max and Narda Barber, They were pleased, observing he seemed to care a great deal for their daughter. Max found one thing off-putting. Bart's conversation was full of profanity. A few weeks after Jen and Bart traveled to Italy for a romantic getaway, Jen called her mother and asked if she was sitting down. As Narda remembered it, Jen told her, Bart and I have made a decision, and I am pregnant, she added. Jen said she had a big wedding, and somehow we did it in 6 weeks. An outdoor 1996. What neither Jen nor her family knew was Bart had been seeing a married woman with 2 children, a woman he met through his dental business. He was also rumored to be seeing a woman 20 years older than he was. He continued seeing. Another thing Jen didn't know while studying dentistry at the Medical College of Georgia and others. He was very egotistical. Who was a year behind him in dental school. She had exquisite features, beautiful eyes, thick black hair, and was one of the secrets Bart kept from Jen. Relationship, he stalked her, not wanting to accept defeat. Though she has a history of harassing her, including breaking. He and his wife Barbara fully accepted that Dolly's cause of death would be changed to malice murder as the probe went on, and that Corbin would be charged with the crime. But that was not to be. No blood splatter moved before any crime scene photos could be taken, making it almost impossible to reconstruct the scene. Though questions remained, Dolly's case was officially closed, leaving suicide as the method of death listed by the sheriff's office and undetermined by the medical examiner. Dolly's parents hired a private investigator to continue looking into her death, and the investigator found a number of people who had heard Bart Corbin talk about hurting Dolly after she broke up with him. On the morning of December 4th, 2004, 2 Corbin home, then waved the EMS team inside. The teams entered the master bedroom and found it just as Kelly Comrie had reported. The woman who lay across the bed had what appeared to be a single gunshot wound behind her right ear. The palm of her hand rested very close to the butt of the .38 caliber revolver. Medics checked her for signs of life. They found none. Patrol Sergeant E.T. Edkin joined his officers and immediately saw that there was nothing they could do for the blonde woman. At first look, it appeared that she had killed herself. Still, with his years of experience working homicides, Edkin questioned whether this was, in fact, a suicide. With crime scene tape, Edkin set up the perimeter around the house and yard, and then briefed homicide detectives Marcus Head, who took charge, about his suspicions, and this death was not what it seemed. Kelly Comrie for Jen's 2 boys. They were still in their pajamas. Officer Michelle Jones went upstairs and grabbed pants, shirt, shoes, and socks from what was obviously the children's bedroom. Glancing into another bedroom on the 2nd floor, she saw clothes of an adult male hanging neatly in the closet. Crime scene investigators from the Gwinnett County Police Department and forensic staff from the medical examiner's office began. All sudden and or unattended deaths were worked first as homicides, next as possible suicides, third as accidental, and only then as a natural occurrence. Nobody yet knew where the dead woman would fit. A search warrant was being obtained. Detectives were trying to locate relatives of Jennifer Corbin. Neither Kelly nor her husband Steve Bart was with him, and he would break the awful news. Steve also called Heather, Jen's sister, who lived about 25 miles away. Heather collapsed in tears, crying out, "Jen's dead." "We ran through the house collecting our kids," recalled Doug, Heather's husband. They headed for Max and Arda's house. In the car, I called Bobby back and said, "Where's Bart? Is Bart with you?" Doug asked Bobby Corbin again, "Are you on your way?" There was no response. Doug. Meantime, fighting panic and disbelief, Max Barber got into his car and drove as fast as he could to Jen's house. Detectives at the scene kept expecting Jen Corbin's widower to drive up any minute. They assumed he would be crying and upset. But that, like most fathers, he pulled himself together and raced to his children in a crisis. It was 8 hours before Bart called the detectives back. By then, he had lawyered up, according to police headquarters, to be tested for the presence of gun residue, but he would answer no questions, not even about securing his home. Marcus had spoke briefly to the young boys who remained in the Camus house until their extended family could arrive. Dalton told the detectives he had gone to his walk to wake his mother to fix breakfast, and he said he had seen blood coming from her mouth, and he had seen the gun. "I tried to call 911 from our phone," he said, "but it didn't work." The boys were questioned again later at the police headquarters when a detective asked Dalton if he wondered why his phone wasn't working. The boy replied, "Maybe my dad cut it off." Arriving at his dead daughter's house, Max Barber parked in the driveway for a long time, waiting to talk to his son-in-law. He was brought to the scene. She had her suspicions. The woman who answered at 911 was already convinced that Jen had killed herself, Heather recalled. "I kept trying to tell her that Bart did it, and she kept saying, 'But ma'am, you don't understand what happened.'" I don't want to keep you guys on here too long because I played too long trying to get this up and running. "And I knew I did understand, and she didn't," said Heather. Jen had confided in me that she was beginning to be afraid of her husband. Heather recalled that while having coffee together once, the two couples had of Peterson during the trial for the murder of his pregnant wife Lacey and their unborn child. "We all talked about it," Heather remembered. "I said something about Scott Peterson and how awful it was, and Bart replied, 'Scott Peterson only got caught because he didn't keep his mouth shut.' The conversation stuck with me." Though Jen had tried hard over the years to make sure her deteriorating marriage worked, in 2004 she made little pretense about how empty it was. Bart was emotionally abusive, and she wanted to be free of him. If only she could figure out a way that wouldn't hurt the boys. Her best friend, Juliet Stiles, knew of her struggles, as did her neighbor and friend Kelly, and of course Heather. They were all pulling for Jen to find some happiness. Bart himself he'd always prided himself on being a good lover. He made pathetic, sometimes desperate calls about the problem to others, including Heather and Doug, in his wife's presence. Sometimes Jen talked to her mother about the issues with Bart. "He makes my skin crawl. I cannot bear to have him touch me." No longer the self-assured husband who had spent years cheating on her with other women, but now clung tightly to Jen. He would not allow a woman to leave him. When Jen brought up the subject of divorce in early October 2004, he seemed to have accepted it, but he begged her to stay in the house through Christmas. Couldn't they have one more Christmas as a family? Apologized to Jen, saying he was sorry if he'd hurt her. He agreed to stay over the holidays. She agreed to stay over the holidays. That would mean 2 more months. She didn't know how she was going to manage. Only one thing gave her a bit of joy. Desperately lonely, she began exchanging emails with someone named Chris Hearn, whom she'd met over the internet on a game site. When she told Heather about this virtual friendship, her sister warned her, "You have no idea who this really is." Sorry. But Jen seemed to find comfort in it and exchanged literally hundreds of emails with Chris. The last name of this person, Hearn, meant nothing to Jen. Molly Hearn, Bart's earlier girlfriend, but when Bart found the emails and started reading them, he assumed Jen had stumbled on Dolly's suspicious death. He became enraged. After Thanksgiving dinner at Heather and Doug's house, when he barely said a word to anyone, Bart unleashed his anger at Jen during the car ride home. He had hauled off and hit her in the face. Their 7-year-old Dalton cried hysterically, but Dylan somehow managed to sleep through the whole thing. Jen fled to her sister's house and went ahead with divorce plans, but on December 3rd, she told Heather, "Or I'll lose our house." Bart filed his own divorce papers. He was behaving erratically. According to his brother and his friends, he'd tear off in the night in his car. Evidence also shows that he made a secret drive to Alabama, returning with a gun. As Jen's family braced for her funeral, the probe into her death widened. Investigators had been learning about the terrible dissension that marked the last weeks of her life. Close to Jen and Bart, friends, family, and neighbors told stories of fear, upset, and a marriage going downhill fast. While the Gwinnett County detectives worked to determine how and why Jennifer Corbin died, Richmond County Sheriff's Detective Scott Peebles and Dwayne Piper carried out the parallel probe into Dolly Hearn's death. Now, 14 years in the past, Atlanta area media that were keeping abreast of detectives in both jurisdictions noticed similarities and started connecting the dots. The people also knew that young Dalton Corbin had blurted out that his father had shot his mother. I need my co-partner here so he could talk some. Okay. Let's see. The attorney Danny Porter of Gwinnett County didn't feel that the 7-year-old's certainty would be enough to get an order an affidavit for an arrest warrant. Despite the circumstances, evidence in Jen's death, there was still no proof of murder. The gun found in her bed had been wiped clean of any fingerprints, as had the murder weapon in Dolly's case. 2 days before Jen's funeral, Kevin Vincent, an investigator with the DA, drove to Bart Corbin's dental office in Decula to search for information. The office was closed. The sign said there had been a death in the family. An attorney's barter dental work for legal advice. The lawyer knew from personal experiences that Corbin had a volatile temperament, and he often heard Bart shouting at his staff right through the walls. The attorney said that Bart had asked him nervously on the afternoon before his wife was shot about which of them would be legally responsible for paying the mortgage on their house if he and his wife divorced. I told him that it would be the one of you who could most afford to pay. That would be Bart, who earned more as a dentist than Jen did as a teacher. The lawyer observed that Bart had been acting strangely that afternoon. He said to me, "Everyone told me not to marry her. I should have listened. But it will all be over soon." At that time, the lawyer thought that Bart was speaking about the upcoming divorce. Investigators made a door-to-door sweep of the Corbin's closet well known. A nearby neighbor said that on one of the occasions he had even felt necessary to step in to protect Dalton from Bart's anger. Investigators also learned that even though he filed for divorce, Bart seemed consumed with pain and rage in the days before his wife died. If they needed to find someone with a motive for murder, Bart was the likely candidate. He'd been obsessed with getting Jen back. Still, he refused to talk. He continued going to his dental clinic and had lunch most days with the married woman, rumored to be romantically involved with them. Deputies and investigators in Augusta, Scott Peebles and DA Danny Craig were especially interested in the 1990 statements of Dr. Eric Reeder, who had been in Bart's office mate in dental school. Reeder said that during the late winter or early spring of 1990, Bart confessed to him that he had come close to killing Dolly. He said he waited in the parking lot of Dolly's apartment, Reeder recalled in a statement. He had a gun. He told me that he was planning to shoot her. Now, in 2004, Peebles located Reeder in the clinic near Atlanta. Did he remember making that statement back in 1990? Yes, Reeder replied. I remember distinctly that Bart told me that. A grand jury heard the evidence, including how Corbin had confided to a friend that he had staged a perfect murder by December. Was hoped to arrest Corbin at his office, a relatively private venue. No one knew how this man, given to violent rages, would react. On that Wednesday morning, while Bart saw patients, a four-man surveillance team waited outside. When the indictment came through, they were told to stand by. He was seeing left the dental clinic. As she stopped in traffic, officers moved in. They surrounded the vehicle, opened the passenger door, and shouted to Bart. Bart was surprised when he learned that he was under arrest on a warrant, not out of Gwinnett County, but from Richmond County. The grand jury there handed down a sealed warrant charging him with felony. And then on January 5th of 2005, a grand jury indictment came down in Gwinnett County after the physical and circumstantial evidence had been reviewed, including a trail of cell phone tower hits that showed Corbin had been in his own neighborhood around 2 a.m., about the time his wife was determined to have died. Bart Corbin was charged with 1 count of malice murder, 1 count of felony murder, and 1 count of possession of firearms during the commission of a felony. If found guilty of both Jen and Dolly's murders, Bart Corbin could be sentenced to death. The 2 young Corbin boys hadn't seen or heard anything. They had been upstairs sleeping at the time of their mother's death. Investigators knew where the gun used to kill Dolly Hearn had come from. Her father had given it to her for her own protection. Bart Corbin had been in Dolly's apartment, according to the evidence, and that gun had killed her. But where had the murder weapon in Jen's case come from? As the dates for the 2 trials approached, Danny Porter's chief investigator, Jack, in Alabama. Richard Wilson sat nervously in the interview room facing the prosecutors, the team from Georgia. He lived in Troy, Alabama. Yes, he said he'd given Bart the .38 revolver. Bart had called him and said that Jen was fooling around on him and that he was frightened he might be in danger. He needed a gun to protect himself. Wilson said he asked me if I had one, and I said I did, so he came here to get it. When the gun, the one taken from Jen's bedroom, was handed to Richard Wilson, it certainly looks like it. On September 15th, 2006, nearly 2 years after Jen died, Heather and Doug Tierney drove to Gwinnett County Justice Center in Lawrenceville. The gallery was packed with 2 women's families, along with investigators from Gwinnett and Richmond counties. The district attorneys and their staffs, the families, had agreed that they would accept a plea bargain as long as Corbin publicly admitted guilt. Bart Corbin walked in between his attorneys, dressed in a suit, his dark eyes burnt holes in the pale face, in his pale face, sorry. He rose to face Danny Porter and stared at him. Porter stared back. Danny Porter described the morning of December, how a 7-year-old boy awoke to find his mother dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Did you in fact commit this offense of malice murder? Corbin's forehead tightened. Yes, he answered. It didn't seem fair that he wasn't required to say anything more. Only Danny Porter and face as he stood there. There was no reaction, Porter recalled later. It was like looking into the eyes of a shark. Then Danny Craig, the district attorney from Richmond County, rose to face Corbin. Do you further admit that you committed the murder of Dolly Hearn on June 6, 1990? Yes, said Corbin. He was sentenced to 2 terms of life in prison, according to the plea bargain, once Corbin spent in jail awaiting trial. He will be eligible for parole consideration in 14 years, but it's hardly likely he'll get out soon. Danny Porter said, I think Bart Corbin will ever see the outside. I don't think Bart Corbin will ever see the outside world again. He won't have a realistic chance of parole in 28 years. If he should be paroled at that time, he'll be in his 70s. Dalton and Dylan Corbin, now 10 and 8, live with their aunt and uncle, Heather and Doug Tierney, in a house filled with cousin sunshine, paintings, music, dogs, cats. They often call Heather Aunt Mommy. Heather breaks into tears whenever she speaks of Jen. She probably always will. Dalton is extremely bright and still carries within him a fear of his father. So this is a man that, because he didn't want to be rejected, killed somebody and got. Then he manages to kill another lady before he can even be charged with anything. The sad story, 2 little boys now grow up without their parent or without their mother. Bart Corbin is now serving his 2 life sentences in Georgia Central State Prison in Macon. An appeal was dismissed, and no parole hearings have been scheduled. Dalton, now 22, and Dylan, now 20, were adopted by Heather and Doug Tierney in 2009. Heather and Doug live in Dawsonville, Georgia. What? The man's sick. He needs help. Like I said, this all. I say get the book, give it a good read. I mean, I know you listen to the podcast, you have a gist of it, but next week we're going to be doing Blood Money. It's a long story, so we'll be doing that for a couple of weeks actually. Again, I'm still working on getting things done the way you guys want to hear them. If you have any ideas for me to change anything the way I did today, please let me know. I'll work on it and try and make this all to where you guys want to hear it and enjoy it. So I hope you enjoy your 4th of July weekend. Spend it with family and friends. I think my boys will be here this weekend, so I'll get to spend time with them, my mom. So just enjoy your weekend. Please be safe out there. There's a lot of motorcycles out there. Watch for one another. And have a good weekend.